Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 11. In Chapter 11, we're going to look at three distinct cultures. In Section 1, as you guys can see on the screen, we're going to look at the Byzantine Empire. Then we're going to move on and look at the Vikings. And then we're going to look at the Turks and a little bit, kind of go back to the world of Islam for a brief moment. So let's get started here. So the Byzantine Empire, you can see the title there, A New Rome. We're going to talk about the characteristics of the Byzantine Empire today. All right, so to set the stage, the Byzantine Empire was really the eastern half of the old Roman Empire. Its capital city was known as Byzantium, and then it was changed to Constantinople under the rule of Constantine. And this was just in the few decades before the empire was officially split. Now, once the empire actually split into east and west for really administrative purposes, the Eastern Empire would actually continue on for nearly 1,000 years after the fall of what we consider the Western Roman Empire, or like Rome. So you can see here in terms of on the map how it was split. Realistically, if you look at the real split between East and West, everything that's in green there and kind of the yellowish, that would be what we would consider the Western Roman Empire, and then everything that's kind of that purple and kind of that pinkish purple, those are that would be what we consider would be the Eastern Roman Empire when it's split in half. Okay, so a new Rome. The empire itself divided in 395, mainly because of administrative reasons linked to difficulties in communication. And if you guys look at any map of the Roman Empire, it's massive, and the ability to communicate and move people, goods, and so forth across the empire is just a huge undertaking, and they're not the empire itself is struggling in a number of ways. Mainly you have corruption going on within the government itself within Rome, and then also because of the prevalence of barbarians, or groups that people would call barbarians, being allowed into the Roman Empire to kind of supplement the military and so forth. They're starting to change and starting to attack at various places within the empire itself. So it's kind of rotting from within, and a lot of it by its own doing. Now, the Eastern rulers view themselves as rulers of all of Rome. So there's something you need to understand there, is that even though the empire splits, and it's formally split in 395, the person that comes to rule in the East still views themselves as a ruler of the entire dominion. All right, so here again, I kind of explained this already to you guys a little bit in terms of where that split was. You can see it a little bit better. Now this one actually shows the two main colors that we associate with the Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire, that red, and then purple is going to be the color that is going to be most associated with the Byzantine Empire. All right. Now, to continue this a little bit more in terms of a new Rome, we're jumping ahead more than about 130 years or so. Justinian becomes the emperor of the Byzantine Empire. He has a upbringing from kind of unnoble means, but he comes to the head of the Byzantine Empire. And his main goal is he wants to regain the entire glory of all of Rome. He wants to be the emperor that brings back Rome under the control of one person and having all that land back again, and if not more. So after a few years, he sends his best general, Belisarius, to reconquer the North African lands of the old Roman Empire, and he succeeds. He expands the empire, the lands of the empire, in his successful campaign. Now, from that staging point, Belisarius undertakes a campaign into Italy and fights a group of barbarians known as the Ostrogoths around Rome. Now, he's able to take it, but not able to hold on to it. Rome is actually going to change hands several times over the next few years. Now, Justinian is successful in his campaign, specifically in North Africa and Italy, as you guys are going to see here in just a moment to see what his gains were. And he does call himself Caesar. He does reconquer enough of the lands to call himself the emperor of all of Rome again, at least in his mind. And he's a very ruthless leader, as you guys are going to figure out a little bit from this lecture today, and then in some other activities and articles that we'll take a look at. All right, so here's what I was talking about. The Byzantine Empire under Justinian, in kind of the reddish orange there, that was his original lands, and then in Belisarius's campaign, Those are the lands in orange that he was able to add on. Specifically there, most notably, is going to be Italy itself, with Rome being its center, and then the North African campaigns like we talked about, as well as the southern parts of the Iberian Peninsula. Okay, so Byzantine emperors, they ruled with absolute power. They had complete control. They could do pretty much whatever they wanted. And then not only that were they political and military leaders, they were also the head of the church. Okay, they were a religious figure as well. And what they typically would do is they would appoint bishops to kind of deal with that scope of their job, because Byzantine emperors focused on more of their political and military realms, and they were ruthless in their political scope because of that absolute power. And because of this ruthlessness, particularly in politics or even in military means, as you guys will learn with like Justinian, what he would do is he would actually write mothers of soldiers that were in prison, saying that like or had died, or what have you. He would write them saying that they gave their lives, or would want this inheritance or money be sent to him. He was so cruel and ruthless in terms of just trying to get as much money from his people that he could. That's an example of what I'm talking about in terms of their ruthlessness. And because of all these problems, or because of all these traits and stuff that the Byzantine emperors had, they were constantly under threat of violence towards them, particularly assassination. You can see here on the screen, 88 emperors. Of 88 emperors, 29 were murdered and 13 stepped down. Think about that. That's 42 of 88 that we're looking at that actually either had to leave office or were murdered because of their actions. And it just shows you in terms of how ruthless and absolute they actually were in their actions. Okay, so a little bit more in terms of the life that was going on in New Rome and why it was so successful is the Byzantine Empire was Roman, but it was really its own entity in itself. It had its own identity, it had its own laws and own infrastructure, and it spoke a different language and so forth. But basically, one of the things that helped organize this empire to run so smoothly with the constant changeover in emperors and so forth was that it had a uniform system of law, and that was created, or at least started, by Justinian. And it would be known as Justinian's Code, and you can still look back on it to this day, and it has a lot of key features to organize a society. And what that code did is it decided the legal questions and helped regulate life. So it helped define marriage laws, property laws, tax laws, and so forth. And this is actually going to serve the empire for the rest of its time. Here's how the Justinian's Code worked. It had 4 sets. First was the code itself. There's roughly about 5,000 old useful Roman laws that they went through and said, okay, these are something that we can use and apply. Number 2 was they had what was called the Digest, which were it was about 50 volumes of summaries and quotes from great Roman legal minds. Mainly they used that because those would help give you an understanding of context in a law. Because you can look at a law, and I can have an opinion of it, you can have an opinion of it, and they can be completely different. But if you have kind of understandings and quotes from people that have dealt with them, it can kind of lead you in a understanding of what they were trying to mean, give you greater context for that law. Number 3 is you had the Institutes, which is simply just a law textbook for students so that the legal code could be passed on. And then number 4 is the Novelle, or the new laws, so any legislation that was passed that was added to the code after the year it was initially created in 534. Pretty simple. All right, so furthermore, the imperial capital, you can't talk about the Byzantine Empire without talking about its capital city of Constantinople. Because without the city itself, without the fortifications that were around the city, the empire doesn't last. For all the greatness and all the good things that they do, the city's fortifications are what allows the empire really to last until 1453. So Justinian, when he becomes emperor, it's not just him wanting to expand the empire and take control of the entirety of all of Rome again. It's also he wants to show off that power. He wants to create the most beautiful city in the world and make it his and make the capital that city. So he rebuilds Constantinople's fortifications. He establishes a 14-mile stone wall around the city, or to help bolster the defenses, because it already had significant defenses around it. He undertakes several programs within the city itself to build churches, schools, aqueducts to make sure that there's enough water getting into the city because it's growing significantly during this time. Hospitals as well, because you need those with a growing population. Also, think about it in terms of it's a cramped area. Constantinople is on a peninsula. Disease can be rampant if you don't have proper sanitation and so forth. So hospitals are going to be needed. But the crowning achievement is the Hagia Sophia. And we're going to look at that here in just a second. But it's going to be the crowning Christian church in really all of Europe until 1453, until it changes hands to the Muslims. Here is a picture of the Hagia Sophia if you were to go to Istanbul today, which is modern day Constantinople. And you can see just how big this building is. It's one of really kind of the great, I would say, great modern wonders of the world, or mid-modern wonders of the world. It's amazing the amount of skill that had to go into building this building in Justinian's time. This would be a difficult undertaking today, and we have much better equipment to build stuff, and they were able to complete this back then. All right, here's some pictures on the inside of the Hagia Sophia. You can see the main altar on the right, and then you can just see how big the scope of the domes, and the main dome is up here at the top, and then you have these pendentives that are off to the sides to kind of space out and kind of bear the weight of the dome. Two things here to point out to you guys. You'll notice, if you remember back to chapter 10, we talked about the Islamic calligraphy in their writing. You can see it's all over this. Remember, the Hagia Sophia starts off as a Christian church, but the Ottoman Turks are going to be the ones that end the Byzantine rule and take over the city. They're going to turn the Hagia Sophia into a mosque, and this is why you see Arabic all over today. And then also, this is the main dome. It is so tall that you could actually take the Statue of Liberty and put it underneath, put it inside, and it would fit. Okay, here's a map of Constantinople just to kind of give you guys a better understanding what it actually looks like, where it was located. You see the walls are all around the city. You have the Hippodrome we'll talk about here in a little bit, the Imperial Palace, the Hagia Sophia, everything kind of in the royal district down here. But look, it's a very, very easily defensible position being on the peninsula there. All right, so culture and education. Although the Byzantines were Roman, most of them spoke Greek because of their closeness to the Greek area. Byzantines valued education, just like we talked about with the Muslims. They were very, very focused on education. They were focused more on, not on like experimentation and math and sciences. They wanted to focus more on classical learning. So they looked towards the Greek and Latin philosophers, looked at grammar and so forth, and studied the classics because they had access to them. They're closely linked to those guys, whether it was studying history through Herodotus or literature through Homer or people like that. They were really focused on the classics from ancient Greece and ancient Rome. All right, so further here we're going to talk about some issues and some things that happened in Constantinople. Specifically, we're going to talk about the Nika Rebellion here. So the main street that ran through Constantinople, known as the Messe, or the Middle Way, was the trade center for products for the empire. And they came from all over around the world as well, because Constantinople is on part of the Silk Road. It's on the western edge of the Silk Road routes. But at the end of the Middle Way is the Hippodrome, which is basically just a place for chariot races. It's an entertaining place. It's a sporting events place. And it was free for people to go. It was a stadium that was big enough that could house nearly 60,000 people, if not some more. It had shops lined around it and so forth. But it was a very popular destination for the lower classes of Constantinople. Now, here's the thing. We're going to connect a couple of points. You remember back when I said that the Byzantine rulers themselves were very harsh, Justinian in particular? Well, you take that, and then you take the lower classes together, feeling like they're being subjugated in some form. They start to push back. And what happens is, in one particular instance that leads to the Nika Rebellion, is there's a chariot race going on in the Hippodrome, and people used to like, were fans of different color teams, which were kind of like political parties back then. So like you'd be a fan of the green team or the blue team or whatever. Well, something happens within the actual race. This rebellion actually takes up. They start calling for Justinian's head. Justinian flees the Hippodrome, gets to his imperial palace. He's about ready to leave, but his wife Theodora, who was really kind of the person that helped pull some strings, she's a very strong-willed woman that had her unique upbringing as a dancer, and becomes this very influential person with the empire, urges him to stay. You can read a quote from her on page 303 in your textbook. And Justinian, just before he decides to leave, she turns him around. She gets him to stay. He calls his best general in, Belisarius, to deal with it. They get the leaders of the rebellion into the Hippodrome as a pretext to like talk and try to talk about their issues. It's a trap. Belisarius kills nearly 30,000 rebels, and they crush the rebellion brutally. All right, here you can see what the Hippodrome looks like. Obviously, they would race around this area. This is seating up here, and then it's all on a hill and incline, as we'll see in a video that we'll watch. But they would put shops down here, so it's kind of an all-encompassing type building there to kind of end the messe, or the middle way there, for people to come visit. All right, so just a couple sides here. The fall of the empire. So after Justinian dies, the empire is going to face a number of setbacks. Now, these are going to be over various periods of time. There's going to be riots, there's going to be foreign attacks, there's going to be earthquakes, all this stuff. But Justinian dies in the late 500s. The empire is going to go until 1453. So, like I said, it's going to be numerous things. Now, one thing that actually is an issue that causes problems for Justinian himself is that not just his people, there's what's going to be known as the plague of Justinian, a version of the bubonic plague, the one that everybody is very famous from the Black Death in Europe in the 1400s, is going to come into Constantinople from rats on trading ships, and it's going to kill a lot of people, up to 10,000 people a day. It was said that it was killing within Constantinople and in its surrounding areas. I believe Theodora died from the plague, or in this plague. Justinian is going to get it and feel the effects of it. It won't kill him, but he isn't the same afterwards. So the empire does get hit pretty hard during this time. As for the attacks, all over the empire, you have various groups that are attacking the Byzantine Empire. The Lombards from the west. You have Slavs, Bulgars, Russians, as we're going to talk about in the next lecture, that they come in and attack a little bit into or attack Constantinople. And then you have the Persians and the Muslims from the east. Now, the Persians, big deal. Sassanid Empire is their name. There's a lot of fighting going on between the Byzantines and the Sassanids, but that's a typical war changing hands. The big one that is going to be kind of the main enemy of the Byzantines going forward are the Muslims in a various number of iterations as we move forward in history. And then Constantinople is going to be attacked several times, but the Turks who will convert to Islam, we'll talk about in section 3 of this lecture, or this chapter. They slowly take territory, and kind of the beginning of the end, even though it takes almost 400 years, is going to be the Seljuk Turkish battle at our victory at the Battle of Manzikert in the late 11th century. That's going to lead to kind of the downfall of the empire. All right, and you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about. So here's in the year 600, so kind of just after Justinian's rule. This is what the empire looks like, and then slowly it starts getting chipped away through the centuries. All right, just a couple more here. So in 1453, this is an important date. You guys cannot forget this. You have to know this date. The Byzantines, what they did is they used anything and everything they could to maintain their empire. Diplomacy, marriages, military power, bribes, anything they could to keep land, add land, whatever they did. One important person that helped keep the empire going and helped with organization was Heraclius. He organized the empire into provinces, or into military districts, which was important because it kind of set up um, a military system that you could deal with threats in different areas. You didn't have to worry about pulling from one or a few significant parts of the empire. You actually had your own military force in the districts that you could call upon. So that delays the enemies, but that doesn't work forever. Slowly, foreign attacks push the lands of the Byzantine Empire back to Constantinople. So by 1350, the empire really only has a tip in Anatolia, a very small strip in the Balkans around the city of Constantinople. But the walls keep everybody out. But it doesn't keep everybody out forever, and Constantinople falls in 1453 to the Ottoman Turks. And you can see this is a cross section of the walls themselves, and this goes along the entire city on the outer edge. And you can see that's a significant defensive perimeter that you have to scale in a number of ways. And here you can see these are the walls today. They still exist in Constantinople or Istanbul. You can see the main wall itself, the secondary wall, and then kind of the beginning of the third wall here. All right, sorry guys. 3 slides left. All right, so division of the church. Christianity develops differently between Eastern and Western Roman empires at this time. Once they divide, it actually creates a division in Christianity because there's distance between who's in charge, contact with different groups of people, different cultures. So, and then also you have an empire in the East that's doing better than what's going on in the West, and when the West falls, you know, it's all broken up. So there's a complete difference there, complete divide. So as the Eastern Empire grows, the distance becomes greater. Eastern Christianity starts to build on the work of earlier figures within the church, whereas you start to see focusing in the West on different people. Now, also, you have the patriarchs, which is the top religious figure outside of the emperor in the Byzantine Empire. They're subservient to the emperor. So there's a little bit of difference there. You have a political figure that is also head of the church. So that kind of helps create a difference as well. So what ends up happening is in 730, Leo III bans the use of icons as religious figures. And this leads to a series of riots and causes some further divisions within the church itself. So the problem with this is that the Pope supports the use, the Pope in Rome supports the use of icons. So you have East saying you can't use them, West saying you should be able to use them. So the Pope in the West, in Rome, orders Leo III to be excommunicated. So this causes that first real big divide at East and West. Eventually, another woman named Theodora, she restores the use of icons in the East in 843. And kind of puts things down for a while. But in 1054, just before the Crusade started, just a few decades before the Crusade started, the Pope in Rome and the Patriarch in Constantinople excommunicate each other. So that further causes a split. And essentially what this ends up doing is it creates the two Christian churches that we have today. In the West, or around Rome, we have the Roman Catholic Church. People that we consider Catholic anywhere, this is where they would link to. And then you have Eastern, in the East, you have the Orthodox Church. So anytime you hear somebody that's Orthodox Christian or so forth, this is what we're talking about. But they're both Christian, from Christianity, but they're caused because of this split. And you can see in the bottom picture here, here's a Pope, not our current Pope, but Pope Benedict, and then I do not know the patriarch here at the time, but you can see this is West and this is East, and here you got St. Paul's Basilica, and this is an example of a Orthodox church. Pretty similar, but a little bit different. Okay, this is the last one. So one of the important things here in the Byzantine rule is that, and it is for the next lecture as well, is the Slavs are going to be converted to Christianity by the Byzantines. And both the East and West Christian churches are fighting for converts all over Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, if they can get them. Now, the Byzantines, they send missionaries up across the Black Sea and into Eastern Europe to convert the Slavs. And they try to get as many as possible. In particular, two very important men, Cyril and Methodius actually, through their workings with the Slavs and trying to convert them, invent a new alphabet, and it's called the Cyrillic alphabet. And the reason why this is important is because it allows the Slavs themselves to read the Bible in their own tongue. So it helps them convert, just as we talked about in chapter 10, where you had a better chance of, the Muslims had a better chance of getting people to come to them and accept their rule, because you could do what you wanted, and or not necessarily do what you wanted all the time, but you had a familiarity that you could just continue living your life pretty similarly. This allows them to do that in a way, in terms of speaking or reading in this case. So that leads to a development of new language, and we see it today as one of the most important languages in Eastern Europe, as the Cyrillic alphabet is what is used by many cultures, especially Russia. All right. And with that being said, Russia will be our next lecture. Sorry, this one took a little bit long. It's probably one of our longer ones of the year. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and have a good one.